Welcome to Farm Here Daily, a field forward podcast. I'm David Geiger, your host. I've been on Iowa TV and radio for the last decade, and I am excited to join you on this new podcast, Farm Here Daily. Today on the program, we'll talk with the folks at ISU Extension. Grant Dewell will be here to speak about a new cattle disease found in the state, and agronomist Meaghan Anderson has the latest weed update for central Iowa. Please be sure to like and follow the podcast as well as our social media at Field Forward Pod. We would love to have you join our community, making sure folks in Iowa are informed about what's affecting our farmers. And joining us on Farm Here Daily, we have Grant Dewell, Extension Beef Veterinarian and Associate Professor with Iowa State University. Grant, always good to talk to you, although it could be under a little bit better circumstances right now because, as I understand, there is a new cattle disease confirmed in the state. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. The state veterinarian released end of last week about identifying the disease thaliariosis caused by Theileria orientalis subtype Ikeda in cattle. It's a protozoan parasite that attacks the blood cells and causes destruction of those blood cells. So we get some anemia problems similar to anaplasmosis, but tend to see it probably more in younger cattle versus anaplasmosis is typically in older cattle. The theileriosis we a lot of times see in the younger type cattle. So slightly different, but very similar, blood-borne parasite type issue.
Let me make sure I'm pronouncing this correctly. It's theileriosis?
Correct.
Theileriosis, it was confirmed in Iowa for the first time. How well do we know this disease?
Well, I mean, not very well as here in Iowa. I mean, we haven't really dealt with it before as it's a new disease for us. It has been, we've been keeping an eye on it as it's been slowly moving westward. It was first identified in eastern U.S., probably 5-6 years ago, and it's slowly been moving westward. So it's been something that we've been on the lookout for, and I guess it's finally arrived. So it is a problem, like I say, that other states have been dealing with.
So this disease is caused by ticks or parasites. Tell me about how that works.
Yeah, so it's can be a little complicated. The protozoan is in the blood. It can be spread by other means. So if we're injecting cattle, giving them a vaccine, and you have a contaminated needle, or we're using a tattoo pliers or those types of things, we can transmit it that way through that mechanical vector. But that's a pretty inefficient way to do it because you're basically just transferring one or two protozoan at a time. But the parasite actually goes through a life cycle in the tick. And so when the tick feeds on an animal and intakes the protozoan, it goes through a life cycle, and then the next time the tick bites an animal, it actually injects hundreds of sporozoites, which then grow and become full-size protozoan. And so the tick is a lot more efficient at transmitting this disease.
Let's take a look at what this means for our producers here. What is the recommended action now knowing that this is around?
Yeah, so there's, unfortunately, there's no treatment for theileriosis. It's a protozoan, and we don't have any anti-protozoal drugs that we can use. So our main mechanism is going to be tick control, which can be somewhat difficult if you ever had to deal with ticks. But it's going to be a matter of surveilling your cattle, particularly this time of year. We've just put cattle out on pasture in the last few weeks in a lot of cases. So we've got a lot of exposure to this. So if this tick has come into the state and we're not used to it, we're probably going to see a lot of heavy tick infestations in those areas, primarily in the southern part of Iowa this summer, but it's going to try to move north as we go through the summer. So paying attention to your cattle, inspecting them regularly, and seeing if we're getting any tick problems on them. Typically we'll see a few ticks on an animal. With this Asian longhorn tick, we'll see thousands of ticks on an animal. So it gets really intensive infections there. So you want to be paying attention, and if you do see ticks, then we're going to want to upstep our tick control, pouring them with a insecticide, maybe treating with avermectin or those type of products to try to get those tick populations knocked back down.
Just to confirm, Iowa has its own distinct tick populations and parasite populations. How common is this battle for our cattle producers to fight these things? Is this a normal process?
Yeah, I mean, we've got other ticks, brown dog tick and the Lone Star tick and the deer tick, which can cause, do attach to cattle, get a blood meal, and go through that life stage. But we don't generally see as much problems with those in versus this new Asian longhorn tick. If you've got 1,000 ticks feeding on you, they can cause problems just by the blood loss from the tick feeding, let alone whether or not they transmit this the filariasis disease as well. So it's a lot heavier infestation than we typically see with ticks.
Grant, as we look at the actual impact of the disease, I want to go back to what you said happens. It leads to some anemia. Can it cause death? What are some of the impacts on the actual production of cattle and beef?
Yeah, it can vary. I mean, a lot of times we get the animal gets infected and deals with the infection okay, and is all right. But in our first case that we had here, we had about a 20% death loss in a group of about 100 heifers. So it can be severe in those situations. So we're kind of got a naive cattle population to this disease, and so I would expect to maybe see a little more problems than other states are dealing with right now, just because we haven't really dealt with it before.
So, what would you recommend, and what is the Iowa Department of Agriculture recommending as we proceed in terms of just tick removal or meeting with veterinarians?
Yep, I mean, so it's mainly going to be focused on that tick control, getting some anti-tick, whether that's back rubber or oiler or those types of things out there to try to maintain that. They always say that it's good to mow your pastures and keep the cattle out of the brush, but that's easier said than done in southern Iowa. But it's something to be cognizant of when you're moving to a new pasture. You could have a reservoir of ticks out there that are going to be an issue. So it's always, particularly when we move pastures, to keep a close eye on cattle and see what they're doing. Otherwise, paying attention to them. If you see an increase in ticks, then we need to get some control measures out there.
Hey, Grant, is there any sort of public health risk with this new disease that just came in?
Not really. So, the tick doesn't really like people. It congregates on livestock, cattle, sheep, deer, those types of animals. And so it may get on a person occasionally, but it doesn't really like people or dogs as their host. And then the protozoan is a cattle-specific disease, and so yeah, there's really no public health risk for people to worry about with this tick.
Grant Dewell, Extension, Beef Veterinarian, and Associate Professor for Iowa State University. Thank you so much for your time to talk about this. And could you give folks any numbers or any places to contact if they're interested in talking more about potentially looking at this in their cattle herds?
Yeah, so there's a lot of references out there. The Iowa Department of Agriculture has a fact sheet out that's got some links to some good references from the USDA on that. So that would probably be the best place to go.
All right, Grant, thank you so much for joining us on Farm Here Daily.
You bet. Thank you.
This is Farm Here Daily. We will have more conversations on the way, but first let's take a look at the marketplace. And there was some red on the board in grains. July corn 9 3/4 cents down on the Monday market close, 4.34 3/4. September falling 8 3/4 at 4.19 3/4. Soybeans in July are unchanged at 10.69 3/4, with August rising 2 3/4 at 10.71 3/4. Soybean meal in July $8.20 a ton in the red at $283.70. Wheat in July 7 1/4 cents down at 5.36 1/2, with September falling 7 cents at 5.52 1/4. In the livestock market close for Monday, June live cattle up $1.92 a hundredweight at $227.02. August, $3.10 a hundredweight more at $215.55. Feeder cattle in August, $3.80 a hundredweight higher at $310.22, with September rising $3.97 at $309.57. Lean hogs in July, $2.32 a hundredweight higher at $111.80, with August rising $2.55 at $112.67 a hundredweight. That is the Monday market close. This is Farm Here Daily. And joining us on Farm Here Daily, we have Meaghan Anderson, Iowa State University Extension agronomist in Central Iowa. Meaghan, always good to have you back on the program. And what exactly is going on in your area?
Oh, the corn and soybeans are finally growing, it feels like. Felt like we sat kind of stagnant for a long time, but things have really taken off. I even drove by a field of sweet corn that had tassels out today.
Wow.
So, 'tis the season to see stuff closing the rows and getting out of those kind of ugly duckling stages, and it's very green on the landscape now.
Right. There's something about the little sprouts, but then that there's a little awkward moment that happens for a couple weeks, and we're finally rolling out of it. As we do, what are some of the things farmers are asking you about at this time of the year?
A lot of weed control questions. We've had a number of cases of like tank contamination or problems with sprayer clean out. I've seen quite a bit of injury to both corn and soybeans, honestly. So there's a lot of differently traded corn out on the market this year that we maybe haven't seen quite as much of in the past. And so I've gotten alerted to quite a few acres of corn that did not have Liberty tolerance that got sprayed with Liberty, which is not a good deal. It's always really important to keep those traits straight so that you don't accidentally treat corn that's, not gonna tolerate a herbicide. The tank contamination's been a real issue, but then now we're starting to hear about weed control issues, right? We're sort of getting through the tail end of these post applications and hearing about some issues where the water hemp is very clearly surviving for the most part, a little bit of grass survival that's concerning. And that's really been most of it, but we're about to the point where we should start hearing more about disease and more about insects. We found a good agronomist found some tar spot in Poweshiek County. And
Really?
that we had our first find of soybean gall midge today as well here in Iowa. So it's about to be the season of disease and insect issues as well.
I bet, because gall midge, that one's something we still aren't exactly sure how to combat it yet. Is that correct?
Correct. One of the most effective ways has been basically like hilling soybeans after emergence, sort of pushing up soil at the base of the plant to cover up the base of that stem, which is where the gall midges are laying their eggs. And that's something that, we just haven't done here in Iowa. And there's just a handful of farmers out in Nebraska, it seems like, that have that kind of equipment to be able to do that. And so that's the most effective method. And again, it's, we're delaying their ability to get into those stems, not even totally preventing it or anything. So no broadly effective insecticides or anything like that yet. Hopefully someday soon.
You mentioned tar spot as well. What are some of the best practices you've seen as you talk to farmers with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the number one way to try to prevent tar spot from being an issue is to choose a hybrid that's going to be more tolerant to tar spot. And so a lot of companies don't have published ratings yet for that. But if you ask the question, usually somebody knows, yeah, these hybrids are a little bit better against it. These ones aren't quite as good. And then, the big thing is just going to be, what does the environment do this year? And so like we saw last year, I think was the earliest find of tar spot in Iowa ever, just a couple days before this year. And the field that it was found in on June 10th or so last year, it never got to the point where it was really that bad. And so the thing that finding tar spot early buys you is the luxury of being able to watch that develop through the season and see whether or not it gets to the point that it needs to be treated with a fungicide. There's very effective fungicides out on the market to treat it, but it's really a matter of what the environment's going to do as to whether we're going to need to be spraying a lot of fungicide to help manage it this growing season.
Let's go back to the subject of weeds, which seems to be one of the bigger topics. What are the types of weeds that central Iowa farmers are currently dealing with?
Oh, water hemp. Maybe a little grass also. I say that sort of jokingly, but it's pretty, water hemp is far and away the number one weed issue that most people are dealing with. I have just a couple of farmers that have our new Asian copperleaf. And then just depending on what the weed management practices are in a field, any given field can have something kind of weird, but grass would probably be right behind water hemp as the number two most common issue that I hear about. So typically that's going to be things like woolly cupgrass, giant foxtail, and green foxtail. But we're hearing a little bit about maybe some yellow foxtail, which I usually think of as more of a pasture weed issue. But that may be showing up in some crop fields as well.
Now, this is something I haven't heard about in a while, so I just toss it by you. Palmer amaranth, that used to be kind of a fear word a few years ago, and I haven't heard it talked about too much lately. Is that just something in the southern counties of Iowa?
No, I am so glad actually that you brought that up, because I think we've heard of 2 or 3 new cases of Palmer amaranth just last summer and already this summer. And so it is something that we should always be keeping an eye out, especially if we're going out and scouting after our post herbicide applications. We should be checking to make sure that, okay, did water hemp survive this application? And if water hemp survived, is it actually water hemp? And so this time of year, we're just starting to see some of the Palmer amaranth flower. I've gotten a couple pictures of some male Palmer amaranth that are starting to put those flowers up on the top of the plant. But the most reliable, consistent way to identify the Palmer amaranth is going to be before it flowers. It's going to be looking at those petioles, which is the little stem that attaches the leaf to the stem of the primary stem of the plant. And so if you fold over that leaf at the base and check and see if that petiole is as long or longer than the leaf blade, that's characteristic that Palmer has pretty consistently and water hemp does not have.
I recall Palmer amaranth being this scary weed, and I kind of likened it to the cockroaches of weed. Is there a better practice in getting rid of it now than what we knew years ago?
Probably the one good piece of news that we have, even though we don't know very much about these populations, because all the populations of Palmer in Iowa have come from somewhere else. They're not like water hemp where, we've got homegrown water hemp all over the place.
Yeah.
So the one saving grace of Palmer is that generally the management strategies for Palmer amaranth are going to be the same management strategies we are already deploying against water hemp. So if somebody's getting really good water hemp control, my hope is that they should also be getting really good Palmer amaranth control, unless they've got a Palmer amaranth population that came in and unfortunately has a different herbicide resistance profile than their water hemp. But generally the management strategies are the same, except that if you have Palmer amaranth and you can identify it early, we would really love to be able to eradicate that from a field. And that's probably not realistic in many cases. But there may be situations where we catch it early enough and we can actually get control of it.
Meaghan, before we go, any notes that you like to make for farmers who are scouting right now or who are preparing for maybe some in-field herbicide applications or drone targeted applications?
Absolutely. Number one, please make sure that your sprayer is well cleaned out, especially moving from corn to soybean, right? Soybeans to soybean is typically not going to be a big issue. But we've definitely seen some issues with product hanging up like behind baffles and in spray booms on dead ends and fence row nozzles, things like that. Make sure that you're following the labels, and then make sure that you're following up on those fields after they've been sprayed and doing that scouting. Usually in the 7 to 10, maybe 12 or so day afterward is going to be a really good time to be out there and make a decision as to whether some of those fields may need to be resprayed, right? We could flag some plants if some things look kind of suspicious, like they might not die. But it's a really good time to just be following up so you can get a better idea maybe of why things survived if they are going to.
Meaghan Anderson, Iowa State University Extension agronomist for Central Iowa. Thank you so much for your time today on Farm Here Daily.
Thanks for having me, David.
Thanks, Meaghan. This is Farm Here Daily, a Field Forward podcast. Thank you for listening. Again, in order to continue to produce this type of local Iowa content, we would love to have you join our community. So please follow the podcast as well as our social media channels at Field Forward Pod. Additionally, you can find me on social media at Geiger Reports, as well as WHO TV Channel 13 every weekday in their morning and noon hour programs. Again, I am your host, David Geiger, and I'll be back again tomorrow.